Hello and welcome to the Stone Circle and You. This is part of an ongoing series that takes a deep dive into various aspects of Kingdom Death. This time we're going to be looking at the Screaming Antelope settlement location, the Stone Circle. This settlement location, which we can see right here, is unlocked in the same way as the Caterium. You get it for defeating the Screaming Antelope. Now before we get into all of the different nuts and bolts of this particular settlement location and its gear, I think it's nice to just talk a little bit about the history of this crafting location and of the Screaming Antelope in general. So, the Stone Circle is the part of the core game that's had maybe the highest number of revisions and updates. When it first came out, it was more of a blend of the Barber Surgeon and the Stone Circle, and then the Barber Surgeon held some of the Stone Circle stuff. But also, the armor set was not particularly well used. I actually think back then in 1.31 it wasn't used much because players just hadn't experimented with it enough. I actually think it was quite good in the very first iteration. But anyway, it got updated for the second Kickstarter for the 1.5 release, and the new armor set that came out was ridiculous. Absolutely insanely good. It was so good that you kind of didn't even bother crafting Node 3 armor, like Phoenix armor, because you just use Screaming armor for the whole campaign once you'd made a set, which isn't really what you want from a Node 2 monster. You kind of want Screaming armor to start falling off when you get towards the end game to force survivors to switch it up and try something new. So when we got to 1.6, it was time for a few nerfs and adjustments. And additionally, in a really good move, everything that involved Screaming Antelope resources was pulled together and placed onto the Stone Circle. And then the Barber Surgeon was rebalanced. So previously the Barber Surgeon required the Screaming Antelope to unlock it. That was pared away, and now you get the Barber Surgeon from the Organ Grinder, which is, a much better move. It was a big problem that the Stone Circle was kind of intrinsic to a lot of generic stuff. It meant that when you didn't play with the Screaming Antelope, because you were playing with Ridiculous, you were also then not playing with the Barber Surgeon. So overall, these changes have been absolutely fantastic. And this version of the Stone Circle, I don't think it needs to be changed at all now. I think they've got it. That's my dog, if you heard that. And also, the Screaming armor's nearly there now. I think it could be slightly improved. And I'll just make a couple of notes when we get to the two pieces that I think could be improved a little bit. I don't usually want to critique in here, but because the Stone Circle has had so many iterations, I think it's worth mentioning that this armor set is almost where it needs to be. It's like the White Lion armor in that it's 90% of what it should be for the amount you pay. Still, there's a lot of good stuff you can do with Screaming armor, and we're going to get right into that. But before we do, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's subscribed and commented and liked. It's been quite a fast growing reaction. A lot of people, a lot more than I expected. So I really appreciate that. Thank you for the support of my patrons as well. Again, really appreciate that you let me keep doing this. So really appreciate all of that. Also, if I'm a little distracted, the gambler's chest arrived yesterday. I had a terrifying experience where it arrived with the packaging just smashed on one side, really badly torn open by some kind of collision. And I was a bit concerned because the interior box had also been impacted. But it turned out that I was fortunate and only the miniatures box got a bit smashed up, and I was going to just get rid of that anyway. So, a bit heart-stopping yesterday. So I've got on the desk next to me the Crimson Croc and the Bone Eaters, and I'm going to be putting the Smog Singers together a bit later today. and then go and finish sleeving everything. But yeah, the Gambler's Chest has arrived, and it's looking really exciting and really good. I actually can't wait for it to get onto the simulator, but that's going to be a while away. We've only had 3 expansions released so far, so it's going to take a bit. What is it, Pamsha? Hi, I'm recording. No, you can't go outside, sweetie. Sorry. Okay, so let's get into the stone circle itself now, shall we? And we're going to begin with the endeavours down here. Just the one this time. It's Harvest Ritual. It requires Forbidden Dance. So let's just quickly talk about Forbidden Dance, and then we'll talk about the Harvest Ritual itself. Forbidden Dance is a music line. It's a tech level 2 innovation. What that means is you need language at 0, you need drums, that's your level 1, and then once you've got that, Forbidden Dance is in the deck and you can potentially craft it. Now, the higher the tech number you go, the harder it is to craft the innovation, because there's more stuff in the innovation deck. That's why Symposium's so great. And well, so this is level 2, so it's a little bit tricky to get to. Now, the big thing is, music, I think, for me at least, is the best of these early trees to unlock. And this is one of the reasons. I'm not going to go into huge detail, but I mostly wanted to say Forbidden Dance as a prerequisite is absolutely fine because it's a good innovation, so you're quite happy to make it, to innovate it. Okay, let's get on to this actual endeavour, Harvest Ritual. So this, let's just see if we can... No, we can't zoom in on it that much. Right, anyway, this allows you to spend any number of monster resources to draw an equal number of basic resources. Now, I said before in the past, monster resources are more valuable than basic ones. And that still is true, but monster resources also have an odd kind of thing going on where eventually you've made all of the pieces of gear you wanted from a given monster, and the remaining parts, they just kind of become basic resources with a fun different name. Now that happens most quickly to bones. With bones, because they use the weapons, and you typically only need 1, maybe 2 weapons per survivor that's going on a hunt, and that's a lot less than the amount of armour that you need. So you'll often find bones kind of start piling up. And some monsters, Screaming Antelope being one of them, actually generate a lot of bones. Like the Screaming Antelope is quite a bony monster. So eventually you may reach a point where you've got a number of monster resources in your settlement storage, and you have exhausted that particular monster and moved on to hunting bigger and better ones, bigger, badder ones. What Harvest Ritual lets you do is stockpile them and then decide a moment where you're going to activate it and spend as many of the excess unneeded monster resources as possible to draw a huge wodge of the basic resource deck. Now the reason you want to do that is you could convert monster bones into generic hide, which is an upgrade because you can then turn that hide into leather, for example. Or you might be looking to get more population, which you can do via love juice. And since 1.6 arrived, we also have the benefit of hitting perfect basic resources, the organ, hide, and perfect bone. So this only became better in 1.6, and it was very good anyway. You're not going to trigger this every year. In fact, you're usually going to save up and then trigger it at certain moments. As such, it's not a use all the time thing, and I think that's absolutely fine. But it's very good, and it's something you should not forget exists. So, one of my favourite endeavours, sorry, and it has a lot of fantastic ways of just changing the game for you. It gives you more options. One other thing, just a brief note, it's not out yet on the KDM simulator, but the Flower Knight produces flowers resources, and they're what's called perishable. So you can't put them in the settlement storage, they'll just get lost. Well, if you have a lot of flowers spare from hunting a higher level Flower Knight or generating a lot of flowers from hitting it with deadly weapons, which often happens because that's its showdown mechanic, you can convert them into basic resources to store them rather than spend them on more things that you don't really want right now. It's an edge case because quite often those kind of resources are very, very useful, but I wanted to mention it here. And that's everything we have to say about Forbidden Dance. So we're going to get onto the gear cards. I'm going to do the weapons, then the armor, and then I'm going to end on the items. And we've got, just sitting around here, these are all of the these are all of the resources that are more common, apart from Spiral Horn, in the deck, and then these are like your either prestige ones or specific. So you can see these on this right hand side are big hits. This one you only get from the level 3, this one you only get by Crush and Devour, which is a specific AI card, and then this, you need this for the Screaming Armor set, but it's super, like, it's one drop in the entire thing. It can be quite elusive, even with the Screaming Antelope being as generous as it is. No. We have only 2 weapons in the gear selection. Our first one is the second Qatar in the core game, and this is the last Qatar in the core game. So if you were looking to do Qatar Mastery, you would end on this. I talked about Qatar in the Catarium, so if you want more details on that as a weapon type, you can go back to there. Here though, I think the main thing to note is bone, positive keyword, and it's really fun design. I love the beast knuckle. It's like a set of brass knuckles made out of teeth. I think that's such a cool thing. It's also paired, like most Qatars are paired, designed to be used one in each hand, makes sense. And this is where we get one of the first themes of the Screaming Antelope gear, which is toughness reduction. So this is when you wound with this weapon, monster gains -1 toughness until the end of the attack. So this is something that rewards running higher speed. Speed is another sub-theme of the Screaming Antelope's gear. It does a lot of stuff to help increase speed. And it's nice to have mechanics that reward speed directly. So you can help yourself in a kind of snowbally manner. If you manage to wound, then it will be easier to wound with each future wound attempt for that attack. And additionally, other survivors can benefit from this by waiting until you're very nearly at the end of your attack and using the last survival window to surge, and then they can also take advantage of the toughness reduction you've done. So that's the main application of the Beast Knuckle. Now, the downside of this weapon is it's got a complete lack of affinities, which is always a negative. Just having affinities on a more edge case gear card can push it from being situational to being good. And the second thing is actually this stat line. So 2, 6 plus, 4. 6 plus is better than 7 plus, which is on the Lion Beast Qatar, and 4 is better than 3. But there's a big difference between this and the Lion Beast Qatar, which is Lion Beast Qatar has Deadly. Now, Deadly's just better than an extra point of strength and an extra point of accuracy. And the lower accuracy just makes it easier to run the Lion Beast Qatar paired. So what ultimately you land with, and I'm getting at here, is this is a fine weapon, but the trouble is it's a fine weapon that is of exactly the same like timeline period as a really good weapon, the Lion Beast Qatar. So I don't see the reason to build the Beast Knuckle in the core game at all. I can see an argument for it if you're playing a campaign where this is the first Qatar you get access to. So if there's no White Lion in your campaign and there's no Spidiculus in your campaign, this could be the first Qatar you would encounter. That's becoming more likely with the advent of the gambler's chest and this cute little boy, the Crimson Croc, who I'm holding, and you can't even see it. I don't know why I'm trying to show it to you. Anyway, so I think this is one you just remember that it exists, and it might be more relevant in the future depending on how you build a campaign and set it up. I think it's fine as a Node 2 weapon. It's just bad progression from the Line Beast guitar, and that makes it limited in the core game. Next up we have the Antelope's Prestige gear card. It's the Lance of Longinus, one of many places where we have references to Christianity. Lance of Longinus was the spear that pierced the side of Christ. This is a spear. It's two-handed. That's pretty normal for spears. It has the bone keyword. That's a nice positive. And when it also has, as you can see, this ability. The first time you wound, the monster gains a -1 toughness token. So that's like fantastic. It effectively increases the strength of this weapon and everyone else's weapons by 1 for the whole entire combat. So it's a very solid ability. It has the standard Reach 2, which is common for most spears. Reach 2 is very good. It's not really worth digging into it. Again, I talked about this in the King Spear. And it also has Irreplaceable. So this is another nega trait. Irreplaceable means if the survivor who's wielding the weapon dies, the weapon is also lost. So that's a bit steep. This weapon costs 1 legendary horns, which you get for defeating the level 3 Screaming Antelope, and 6 basic organs. So the flip side of this being steep is it's actually kind of cheap. And I should actually briefly mention, this is a large flat tooth and a pelt. That's actually an exactly comparable crafting cost, almost comparable with the Lion Beast guitar. It's actually a bit more expensive because you're using 2 monster specific resources. But sorry about that aside, and dripping back to the Beast Knuckle, I just realised I need to mention crafting costs. They do matter. So anyway, the Lance of Longinus' crafting cost is actually quite low. So Irreplaceable isn't terrible. I used to really hate this keyword. I still don't think it has a place on a crafted gear card. It's a little galling, but this is fine for a Spearmaster or somebody very near Spear Mastery, because you don't really want to lose them. And you can also make multiples of this weapon because it's not unique, so you can have a bunch in the settlement storage available to go and reach if your spear wielding survivor does die. Now, the actual real downside of the Lance of Longinus is this stat line, which on paper looks fantastic. 2 speed, excellent. 6+, bang on average. 9 strength, very good. But there's another weapon that exists within the core game that sits in exactly the same level of progression as the Lance of Longinus, and it is just a better weapon for the core game campaign. That is the Lantern Glaive. It's a strength 4 weapon, if I remember correctly, with sharp. So effectively it has around the same strength as the Lance of Longinus. But it has an affinity, which this doesn't. And it also has the axe weapon type. So it's a spear axe. And that's really good, because what it means is you should push to complete spear early. Once you've completed spear, you can then get a Lantern Glaive and train up an axe survivor for the end game, because axe is like very powerful as well. But you also get the benefits of spear specialization while doing it. So that puts the Lance of Longinus in a rough spot. Now there are situations where it is going to be better. Number one is if you are playing without People of the Lantern, because then the Lantern Glaive doesn't upgrade, so they're more comparable, but I would still give it slightly the edge to the Lantern Glaive. Also, if you're playing bone-related campaigns and you're looking for bone synergy, the Lance of Longinus gets in ahead there. But I think this doesn't have the same problems as the White Lion prestige weapon. It does at least have an appropriate level of strength for its crafting, for how hard it is to craft. And I think it's fairly solid. So this is definitely something you want to remember that exists. And while it isn't part of the typical spear progression path in the core game, it is not a terrible alternate over the Lantern Glaive. Let's get on to the armour, shall we? So, Screaming armour. Most of the armour actually has the fur keyword, but the Screaming Horns are a little different. They have bone. Every single piece in the set provides 2 armour points. That's where I'm going to make my brief note. I actually think that the Screaming Horns and the Screaming Skirt should provide 3 armour points. We'll look at the whole set and I'll just make my state my case for that when we get to the set as a whole. But let's look at this ability on the Screaming Horns. So we have you activate, you scream, non-deaf insane survivors gain +1 movement until end of round. All other non-deaf survivors gain +1 insanity. Now, this is actually a changed wording. This was changed by, it was stuff I fed to Adam. The legendary card pack was at least based partially on my feedback and, more importantly, the feedback of my community. One of the things I discovered, the original Screaming Horns, they had a loophole where deaf survivors would just gain insanity endlessly. So if you're fighting the White Lion and it did ground fighting, for example, so it's not doing anything, you could endlessly loop screams for as long as you wanted, because there's no time pressure to complete the showdown quickly because the monster's not doing anything, and effectively you could generate as much insanity as you wanted because insanity doesn't have a cap. Uncapped insanity it's kind of a place where the game can break. So it was updated and changed, so now if you're deaf you don't hear the scream. Mechanically that solved the problem. Thematically I also think that's really good. So I love the design of Screaming Horns now. This is a great little support ability that will let you either help other survivors get into position if they're already insane, or help protect their brain if they're a bit low on insanity, which is fantastic. This blue affinity is great, but I'm going to talk about the affinities as a whole when we look at the set. So beyond just highlighting it, that's all I really have to say. I think this is a very good headpiece. I would just really like to see it get 1 more armor, because it feels weird that this has less armor than the skull helm. It's another bone helm, and I just think it should be a bit tougher than everything else in the set. Next up we have the arm piece, Screaming Bracers. This is where fur keyword kicks in. Fur's a good keyword, good material keyword, so positive. It has 2 affinities, they're solid, same armor points, and it has a really unique ability. This is when you activate terrain, you may add +2 to your roll result. So the reason I have Acanthus up here as a little example, if we just look at what +2 does, suddenly with a +2 you cannot get this worst result, and you get this only 20% of the time. 20% of the time, and you get a higher chance of getting the fresh Acanthus, which is fantastic. So what this is giving us with Screaming Armour is we're seeing a picture of a armour set that does kind of utility support things. So you're running around the board, doing the terrain, and helping the other survivors out with a little bit of extra movement or insanity as required. That's a very interesting spot. It also means you should be looking to get a tool onto the gear grid of the Screaming Survivor as early as possible, so you can leverage the benefits even further. I prefer the sickle, because Acanthus, that's more synergy there. And the sickle doesn't tend to break at all on the hunt, but the pickaxe is also absolutely fine. Just be aware it can break at times during mineral gathering. Then we have the big one. This is the body piece. This is our second monster movement ability, and it's Slam. So first of all, amazing. Look at all these affinities. I love seeing this on a piece of gear. That is a piece that you can start building around. But Slam is also phenomenal. You spend your movement, you full move forward in a straight line. If you move 4+ spaces and you stop adjacent to the monster, it suffers knockback 1 and -1 toughness until the end of the round. So essentially you run at the monster and you body check it, sending it backwards, and again we're doing this toughness reduction. So that is something you can do at the start of the round, and all the other survivors then benefit because they effectively get +1 strength. -1 toughness to the monster is +1 strength to all your survivors. Now you'll notice that it suffers knockback 1, which means it's kind of out of reach of you unless you're using reach weapons. There's also the armor set. When we get to set bonus, it synergizes with this. But along the way, before you have a full set, if you're slamming, you're going to want a reach weapon just to make sure that you can still get to the monster if you want to and benefit from this toughness reduction. Very, very good ability. Then we have Screaming Skirt. It's very straightforward. 2 decent affinities and +1 to severe waist injury roll results. This is perfectly fine. I wish it had more armor to add into the theme of this thick protective fur and also get the armor points to where I'd like to see them. But apart from that, it's fine. This is just an emergency back pocket kind of ability. You don't want to be doing severe injury rolls, so you're usually looking to avoid them, and things that avoid severe injury rolls are better than things that give you bonuses on it. But this is still very good, and there's going to be times it's going to be the difference between life and death, so you can't complain that it's there. Finally, we have these Screaming Leg Warmers. So apart from being a really, I love the idea that they're leg warmers, just that 1980s sort of retro vibe of wearing leg warmers while exercising. That always just tickles me a bit. I love it. 2 decent affinities and a nice ability, +3 insanity on arrival. So this means you can go on the hunt and lose all of your insanity along the way, or have none when you depart, and you can still have insanity, be insane, in fact, at the start of the showdown. That means the Screaming Armor can help you handle sentient weapons. There's a sentient weapon that's fairly prominent in People of the Lantern. That is the Twilight Sword. So this armor set, including Slam, which can help with the Twilight Sword starting off as being cumbersome, gives you a way of handling the drawbacks of that weapon fairly effectively. So another use for this armor set. So it's great with the Twilight Sword, it's great with spears, and it's got a bunch of neat little utility things that can help the armor set support everyone else. So if you're wondering what the spot for this armor set is, well, we will discuss the kind of builds you use it for, but in particular it's using spears and interacting with various different things. Before we get on to the other items, the other gear cards, the items, I'm going to quickly look at spear progression and the armor set itself. So, first of all, let's start with the set bonus, shall we? Okay, so our set bonus here is +1 armor to all hit locations. That puts Screaming Armor at 15 hit points. Now, Screaming Armor costs a spiral horn and a scrap for the head, a pelt and a hide for the arms, a pelt and a bone for the body, a pelt and a hide for the waist, and a pelt and a hide for the legs. That's a really big cost. That's nearly, well, it's double the number of resources as Rawhide, and we're also looking at some fairly premium resources because many of these are double hide gear locations, gear cards, armor cards to craft. We got there. Woohoo! 15 armor points just isn't enough for what you're paying, so you have to really supplement this armor set with a shield. For the record, my personal opinion is 17 or 18 armor points would be the right spot for Screaming Armor. 20 is definitely too much. Absolutely, it shouldn't be 20. It gets a lot of really good affinities and it gets a bunch of good synergies. But Rawhide has 10 armor points on all locations and has a bunch of really good abilities, and while it only has 2 affinities, they're super relevant and very good as well. So that's my final critique on Screaming Armor. I think it's so close to being there. Put another point on the head, on the body, and on the waist, or maybe 2 of those 3. I'd say head and waist if you're only doing 2. And I feel like Screaming Armor would be exactly where it needs to be in power. So now let's take our amateur designer hat off and get on to the ability, which is Skewer. So this triggers after slam, and it optionally lets you spend an activation to move one space and activate a melee weapon with +2 strength. So one thing to note, this means you can actually use slam and rush forward, and you hit the monster and you knock it backwards, and then you get to step in and crack the monster with extra strength, even if you don't have reach, which is fantastic. And that +2 strength sits on top of the -1 toughness. So that's really a powerful bonus for any kind of weapon. Which means don't get hung up on always using Screaming Arm with spears, even though it has a specific spear synergy afterwards. I think it's at best with spears, but you can put other weapons on it, and we're going to look at a couple that are interesting to use with Screaming Armour because they take advantage of all the affinities the armour set provides. Our spear specific bonus is, if you wound with a spear, apply that wound roll to the next selected hit location in this attack. So essentially that means if you wound with your first spear roll, you get to put the same result on your second spear roll. So that is pretty good. It can allow you, say if you draw a reflex reaction and failure reaction, you can roll to wound the reflex reaction, and if you successfully wound, then you get to ignore the failure reaction. So that can be quite a lot of protection while attacking, and that's solid. But it isn't so amazing that you have to always go with Screaming Armour plus Spear. The other part of the puzzle we're going to look at is up here. This is the affinity layout. So this is actually one of the layouts that may not be immediately intuitive. Obviously the layout is fine, but I mean the positioning. You might not think of putting it on the right hand side here because you'd be like, oh, I want to connect this blue. The thing is, outside of trying to get the blue charm online, this extra blue is just not needed for most weapons, most gear cards. You've already got a lucky charm online with these two, so spacing it like this actually makes it possible that you could do monster grease, something connect to monster grease, a shield and a weapon to have a better sort out layout. Of course, if you wanted to put something on that side because you want that extra affinity, it's very easy to just do this and put it there. But you'll notice now, monster grease isn't ever going to connect to anything if that's what you were trying to use. You've not freed up any additional configurations. You've actually reduced your space for possible puzzle connections. Another example could be Monster Tooth Necklace plus a left facing red, and then you got the red there. So that is something to think about. These are the two positionings I would put them in. It's also, in my opinion, absolutely fine to do this and put this down here if you have other things in mind and you need to lay it out up here differently, if say you're using a lucky charm here. Okay, before we get back then, let's look at our spear progression just briefly, because this is a spear set. So you're going to start with a King Spear. We've talked about the King Spear in the past. It's pretty good. Then my opinion is, in the core game, your next spear would be Finger of God, which has a great stat line. This is a good weapon for something you can get from the level 1 Phoenix, and it has a nice bit of affinity synergy, so with Screaming Armour. And finally, the Lantern Glaive is typically the one that is a better choice, especially in People of the Lantern, but you may choose to go with the Lancer Longinus because of bone synergy, or because you want to just mix things up, or you don't have access to the upgraded version of the Lantern Glaive because you're playing a different campaign. Right, so let's go on to the items, shall we? First up we have the Bone Mehendi. This costs a beast steak and a bone to make. Mehendis are something, there's a lot of them in the Lion God, but when we get to keywords, the boss Mehendi is missing the symbol keyword, which is the one that is used for synergy with the Lion God specific content. So this is the only Mehendi that doesn't work with the Necromancer, which is the thing that cares about symbols. It's a bit weird. This was mentioned, it hasn't been updated, so I don't know if this is going to ever get to the keyword that it needs. As for its ability, while adjacent to you, insane survivors gain +1 speed. The main trick with this is to run it in a formation where you have spear users, because spear users can attack with higher speed and suffer less of a punishment for doing so. And you're sort of looking at maybe a phalanx kind of shaping, where you put like a tank at the front here with a shield, and you have a spearmaster like maybe here and here, or tank here, spearmaster here, and boss here. It's interesting, but the big problem, apart from the lack of the symbol here, is it doesn't have any affinities, and it's very hard to justify an item like this in a gear grid where you've got limited slots if it's not providing affinities. It needs to be good. And also, this is conditional. +1 speed as long as they're insane and they're adjacent to you. So there are situations you can use this. You certainly can have some fun increasing the speed of acid tooth daggers as well, because they trigger for each perfect hit. That's the other kind of thing that this will help support, is perfect hit builds. But it's not something you just generically use without thinking about it. This is definitely a build around card, and it's a build around with team play, which makes it interesting, but ultimately lack of the symbol keyword, lack of affinities, that makes me feel like it's just not quite there for me. I've always been a little disappointed when I try and use this, and that is a shame. Next up we have bone earrings. I've talked about bone synergies, and this is our first bone synergy item. This costs a shank bone and a bone, so fairly cheap crafting cost. It has the bone keyword, and at the start of your showdown it gives you +2 speed and +2 strength tokens as long as you're insane, and everything in your gear grid has the bone keyword. So you need to make sure you're going to get through the hunt phase without losing too much insanity, so you want to maintain a fairly good level of insanity if you can try and build around this. And also, there's not a huge amount of pieces of armor with bone. Stuff like the screaming horns, that has the bone keyword. Skull helm has bone keyword. The lion coat, I think it is coat or cloak, the one that's not part of the white lion armor set. I always get the name mixed up because they're so similar. But that also has the bone keyword, and you'd probably be using that in a gear grid like this. It's an interesting build around. It is a fun, unique thing, and there's a bone spear. This is great for supporting the Lance Longinus. So ultimately, situational. It's cheap though, and you can build a fun thing for it. And additionally, this is just tailor-made for extreme silliness with people of the skull, because hey, it's bone itself, it supports bone, and you're going to have a lot of bone in your gear grid, so it's not much of a stretch to go full bone, which I do appreciate that this exists, and it is fun to use for sure. And we have the Elder Earrings, item jewelry. This costs a shank bone and a scrap, so again it's very cheap to make. I think you should always consider crafting one of these. Very straightforward. It has 3 really good affinities. All of these are amazing, by the way. Like, this helps white lion armor. This is monster tooth necklace. This is monster grease. This is as good as it gets, short of prismatic affinities, which come with the Sunstalker only, so we won't worry about those here. On arrival, you get +2 survival. It's always nice to have survival on arrival. It even rhymes, so it must be good. And then during the aftermath, you gain +1 hunt XP. Obviously, that can shorten the lifespan of the survivor, but it's really good on newbies. If you've got a survivor who's gone out hunting and they start with 0 hunt XP, this can push them up to age a whole year faster, and that means they can get to their weapon proficiency if they are training a new weapon proficiency and they haven't inherited any via family. Fantastic. Just really good. It's a really good utility item. You're not going to use it every single hunt, but I think you should just have one. You should always pick one up if you have the crafting materials for it, especially given that it's constructed out of bone and bone. Okay, our next item is Brain Mint. This is made just from the Screaming Brain. There's only one Screaming Brain in the Screaming Antelope's deck. If you get that drop, you should just craft this, because it is a very unique little gear card. It's a consumable that has some synergies, some positive, some possibly negative, so that's absolutely fine. It has 2 decent affinities. That connects to the leather shield, that connects to the lucky charm. So, and this is an unusual orientation as well. You don't often get this L shape of these 2 colours, so that's super useful. Its ability, you activate and you consume, so you have to be able to consume. You remove all your tokens and stand up. Fantastic. You may use this while knocked down. Amazing, that makes sense. And use this once per showdown, so you may want a little reminder marker on it to let you know when you've used it, or if you haven't used it, depending how you want to do things. I tend to keep like a little uses counter on there, and then once I use it, I take it off, and that's how it works for me. Now, the interesting part here, on top of the affinities, is this removal tokens. So bleeding is tokens. The priority token is a token. Negative tokens are tokens. There's a load of things that this can help deal with. Another example would be, say if you're struggling because the butcher has like frenzied the heck out of one of your survivors to the point that they've got so much speed they can't hit the butcher without triggering the trap a lot of times. Well, hey, if you get knocked down by the butcher, and the butcher tends to knock people down reasonably often, you can use this to get a reset on all your frenzy issues, and that is incredible. So this is something that's great to have in your back pocket. The first one's amazing, but I wouldn't even be upset to make the second and third ones, because what else are you going to use a Screaming Brain for apart from a generic resource or fodder for the Harvest Ritual? So never forget this exists, and there are a bunch of situations where it can be really powerful. I didn't even mention, and I should, like the Kingsman seriously punishes a knockdown, incredibly punishes it. So having this as a way to surge and get back to your feet before drawing a Kingsman AI can be life-saving. Our other prestige gear card, so this is prestige because it comes from the second heart, and you can only get this during a specific AI card and showdown story event. It's quite scary to get. It's it's quite rare for everything to line up that you can even get a chance of getting this. So it is hard to make this. As such, if you do get a second heart, you should craft this item because it's rare. It's very rare. It's an item and it's soluble. Solubles are negative, but only against certain circumstances. Don't take it against the Sunstalker. It has only 1 affinity. It's in a good orientation for blue, but that is a bit low for a item that is only once per showdown. The effect is fairly simple. Activate it, suffer 2 brain damage, gain +1 speed. So, as mentioned before, spears benefit from getting extra speed. That's a nice place to use it. The 2 brain damage can also be a benefit because certain monsters do outright punish you if you go past a particular level of insanity. The Screaming Antelope's one of those. The Slender Man at high levels is another. So, something to keep in your back pocket to maybe save a survivor in the situation that their insanity's got a little bit out of hand and you're facing a monster that will punish them for that. Ultimately though, there's not too much more to say about it. It's very basic. While I think you should craft one because it's rare and you might find utility uses for it, ultimately what it's doing is very straightforward. And there's no fancy tricks to getting extra speed beyond pair it with a weapon that benefits from extra speed like spear or a perfect hit weapon, or maybe deadly weapons so you can score more hits with deadly weapons. Or if you're just one of those people who wants to roll a fistful of dice because that reminds you of playing Warhammer 40k, hey, knock yourself out. You may have some real fun with this. So yeah, it's another fine item. I wish it had more affinities for what you pay, because it is a very hard to get item, but it is what it is. Our last item, though, is my favourite item in the entire game, bar none. This is blood paint. It requires the paint innovation, which is fine. Paint is maybe the third innovation you want to unlock. Like in your typical ideal progression, you would go third innovation tree. You'd go Symposium, then Drums, then Forbidden Dance, and then you'd unlock Paint fourth. That's like my ideal progression. Dash is more powerful than Surge. Dash increases your ability to get back into combat and also helps you avoid getting hit, which is why it's stronger. So this is a unlock that you want to achieve no matter what. So that's just fantastic that you get. It's not like it doesn't hurt you. It's not. Oh, I'm taking a hit to my innovations to craft this, and that's wonderful. As for what you can do with this. This enables an entire playstyle, which I championed, called Bruisers. And it also enables dual weapon fighters. So Bruisers are sword and board. That is a one-handed weapon plus a shield, and essentially it lets them activate their shield, because shields are weapons, and then it lets them attack. And so they get to attack with their deflect tokens or their blocked already set and good to go. Phenomenal. Just really, really powerful. And there's so many different things. That, like, given that the only downside of this is it cannot be used with two-handed weapons, and it basically means your weapons take up 3 slots in your gear grid. That makes it very balanced. I don't think it needs any affinities, because it is just well balanced. And also it's cheap. It's 1 bladder and 1 organ. The only tricky thing is bladder is a single drop in the Screaming Antelope deck, so it might be hard to get, but honestly, I would turn maybe even 3 bladders into blood paint just to have the options. Usually 2 is probably as many as you need though, but there's no reason to not be using blood paint. It is fun, it is powerful, it's everything I want. So that is all of the gear, and we'll do a quick sort of rundown again before we go on to looking at builds. So here we are, Screaming Armour. It's a very good support set. It is a very good spear set. It's just a little bit less durable than it needs to be, so you can't use it on the front line too often without a shield. Boss Mehendi, very situational. You may be looking to boost speed on certain survivors and stick together adjacent to each other for some reasons. That may be good. Beast Knuckle, I think you can pass on unless you're not playing with the Lion Beast Katar or the Scrap. I think it's a Scrap Katar from the Spidiculus. Brain Mint, craft it whenever you get a Screaming Brain. Blood Paint, craft it whenever you get bladders. Bone Earrings, if you're looking to build bone builds on bone grids, yes, make it. It's cheap enough that you can make one and play with it for a bit, and if you don't like it, then it's not a big cost. Speed Powder, 1 second heart, 2 organs. It's expensive, but you should craft it because this is rare to get. Elder Earrings, you should have 1 for definite. It's cheap and it's got a useful utility ability that may speed up survivor development occasionally, and a bunch of really good affinities. Also, ageless survivors don't care about the XP gain, so it just becomes plus survival and bunch of good affinities for a ageless survivor. And last of all, Lance of Longinus, as mentioned before, it's kind of a little bit behind the Lantern Glaive in power, but it does have the bone keyword for synergy with the bone earrings. And if you don't plan to upgrade the Lantern Glaive, or you don't have access to the upgraded Lantern Glaive, this can be an acceptable replacement. I just recommend that you hunt a level 3 Screaming Antelope, and then you immediately hunt another one so you can craft 2 of these lances and have a backup one in the settlement in case you lose your first one with your particular survivor. But if you plan to just run it on a Spearmaster until they retire or they die, nothing wrong there. Nothing wrong with the replaceable there. Okay, so last thing now is to just look at a few builds. We're going to go to the gear grids now. Okay, so first up, I'm just going to look at blood paint over here very quickly. This is a sample blood paint build. I'm using leather because it works really well with the affinities. This is a frontline sword and board bruiser. So what we're getting is we're getting our +2 evasion, we're getting our survival, we have a little bit of maneuverability, we have a shield for blocking, and then we get a little bit of insanity protection when departing. But importantly, we can attack, activating our shield, and then swing in with a very good one-handed weapon. This, what you're looking for is like high strength on a single one-handed weapon. Sonic Tomahawk is really good, so that is a possibility, but you could put other one-handed weapons in there. Riot Mace would be fantastic. A rib blade is actually a one-handed grand weapon, so there's plenty of options in there. So that's one example. The other way is you swap this and you have a different weapon. You don't want two of the same weapon, though you could do it with double Sonic Tomahawks because they're paired. And so this one would have 6 speed and then this one would have 3 speed with no extra abilities. That's actually a viable way to do this. Or you can have 2 different weapons, which I think looks cool when survivors are attacking with like holding 2 different weapons. But you know, that's the options. You can do this with a bunch of other gear grids as well. The main thing is you want to be able to ensure you have this row somewhere in the gear grid that allows you to do all of this. I'd say maybe the only armor set that you'd never use this with is Gorment armor, because Gorment armor has an inbuilt activation ability for shields anyhow, so it's kind of redundant to run blood paint with them. Now let us quickly look at Screaming armor. So here is our first sample Screaming armor build. We have got, this is to demonstrate how you can use Screaming armor affinities to get an unusual weapon active. So our goal here is to have Deadly on the scrap sword, which is usually a bit of a situational weapon, but we're using Deadly. We've got an active Lucky Charm because we've got 1, 2 blue affinities, and thanks to the Bone Club here, we've got 1, 2 red affinities. So this is active, and then we've got a little bit more armor to help us get further in the showdown. So very straightforward. Now let's do a little bit of moving around and we can demonstrate a few other builds. Excuse me, that's the wrong button. Right, so if we now close up the gear grid, we've got this, and then we can put this. Oh, sorry, actually we shouldn't close it. First of all, we shouldn't close up the gear grid. Oh my god, my apologies. Sorry, there we are. So then there's this. So this is the Rainbow Katana build. We are getting +2 strength, so it's got 6 strength. We're getting Deadly, and we're getting this. Additionally, at the moment, this still has Frail, but if we do this, boom, it's fine. If you're going to do that, you need to move all of the armor set over to here, like so. And then that's that gear grid. So we can see there, we've got our extra luck, we've got our 2 blues, we got our 2 reds, and we got our puzzle connected. Which is neat. So let's see if I can remember how I arranged this gear grid underneath here for the very last option. So we do this, we get rid of this, and here we go. There we are. I nearly made that all look smooth. I only messed up twice. This is what I would call your default Screaming armor set. So obviously we've got a lot of flexibility. We can move all this to the left if we want. We can put these in different places, and this is a very good spear that is taking advantage of these lovely affinities here. It's just a fantastic little build, and this spear obviously gets better the more survival limit you have. So any spear could be there. You could have a king spear, you could have a lantern glaive, a lance of Longinus, but this is the other. Like, this is the default kind of build. I think a shield with armor points is more or less essential on Screaming armor because it's just lacking that extra oomph to get it going. And of course, when you have shield mastery, everyone in the settlement has shield specialization, and this becomes +2 armor to all locations. Obviously, you can even switch this with a beacon shield to get even further in the campaign. That will be more block on your Screaming armor, so you can prolong the lifespan of the armor set quite well. And there are a bunch of other cool spears that this will work with in expansions. So, that's it. That's the Stone Circle. That's everything you can get from the Screaming Antelope. My assessment overall is I think this is a very good crafting location. It has a few areas where I think it could be slightly better, mostly on the affinity front or, you know, armor points, but there is so much to be playing with here that I think you can find stuff to support builds for years to come. And like when we get more bone armor pieces, which we're possibly going to see, bone earrings may kick off to a whole new level. I didn't even really get into how regal armor is bone, so that's another like possibility. You could, if you have a cursed survivor with regal armor, you could even use it that way. Anyhow, that's it. That's the Stone Circle. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end here. Thank you to my patrons. Like, comment and subscribe, call to action, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, happy hunting.